Welcome back to another edition of Blueprints and Banter. I am your host, Steve Cona, President and CEO of ABC Florida Gulf Coast Chapter. Welcome back, everyone. And today we are joined by a very busy man. He is not only one of the co-founders of Document Crunch, but also a construction lawyer. And I'll let him introduce himself. Adam Handfinger, welcome.
Thanks, Steve.
You bet.
My first podcast.
No, it's awesome. Welcome.
Hopefully I don't mess it up. So thanks for the intro. My name's Adam Handfinger. I co-founded and I'm the current chairman of Document Crunch, and I've been practicing construction law for 25 years. I run the Miami office of Picard & Abramson, which is a nationwide construction law firm.
Nice.
So yes, very busy.
Yeah, very busy guy. Let's talk about Document Crunch a little bit, and then we'll talk about some of the challenges that our industry faces.
Sure. Document Crunch is an AI-driven platform designed specifically and exclusively for construction. It's got various different AI agents and tools that can be used throughout the project lifecycle, everything from reviewing RFPs, contract documents for negotiation, and for project execution, and the list goes on and on. So it primarily is intended to support project teams, to help them complete a job successfully and in a compliant way, and guide them through the process.
Right.
So throughout my legal career, one of the things we've seen, and Josh Levy, my co-founder as well, is project teams not knowing the rights that they have and the things they have to do to comply with the contract during construction. And no matter how much you train them before the job starts, and no matter what tools you give them to hopefully use the contracts as a guide, invariably that process falls apart.
Yeah.
So where we've seen the biggest value proposition is at the project team level, particularly with small and mid-sized contractors, although we certainly have a lot of big contractors use as well, and trades, it's incredibly useful. Typically trade contractors sign very onerous contract documents.
Right.
So while they may not get a huge opportunity to negotiate, they should at least know what's in them and do and comply. So that's pretty much Document Crunch.
Well, it's amazing that someone like you who's on the front line of, all of these contracts, all this construction law is now like being able to create a system, a technology that's going to benefit our industry.
Yeah, and a large part of my practice has always been out in the field. When I was a younger lawyer, it was physically out there. Now technology allows me to interact with project teams more virtually, but during the job, to help the jobs stay on the rails, and if they start to go off the rails, get back on. Our practice has always been in real time like that, helping people avoid litigation. So Document Crunch really was the natural extension of that and allows us to democratize that knowledge base to people that wouldn't have otherwise had access to it. So it's a nice complement to what I've always done. Started out, by the way, really as a pure negotiation tool.
Right.
The first iteration of it was just to help the pain point of reviewing and negotiating contracts. But as we've grown and we've seen where the real need was, it's gone much bigger than that. And the advances in technology and artificial intelligence, which it seems like every few days there's new things coming out. We've got a really solid team of folks who make sure that when you run a process in Document Crunch, on the back end you're getting the very best models that are possibly available.
Yeah. So that's what's interesting. So technology is always changing, but now in the environment that we have in the construction industry, we are facing different challenges, right? So let's talk about what's happening with immigration, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about tariffs as well.
Sure.
Let's start with immigration. What are contractors seeing right now, and how can they protect themselves?
So interestingly, in the experience that I'm having with my contractor clients, we've seen some raids, we've seen some enforcements. I've seen it broad scope where they're coming in just without anyone necessarily in mind, but more we've seen very targeted. There's a few individuals we know where they are. We're going to go apprehend them. I think the bigger impact is the fear of the enforcement.
Correct.
And especially in Florida, where we have very strict e-verify rules. The initial expectation, if I was talking to you a year ago, let's say, I was saying, well, I think in Florida, for the most part, we're going to find out that we're okay. But what happens when Texas starts to have problems?
Right.
They're going to draw on our labor force. So I definitely am seeing, as I had expected, some of that migration. But I think the biggest impact is people are afraid to go to work, even if they're documented.
Right.
So
they might have family members that live in their house, or it could be anything.
Right. So, like landscapers,
Right.
is a trade that I've seen hit the hardest so far. Where I can think of several instances on projects where the trade contractor just can't perform. They don't have people to do the work. Not necessarily because they're not documented, but because they're choosing not to leave their homes because of the fear of what could happen, right? Maybe something's not in order, or even just having to go through that process. So that's what I've seen so far. Um, a few things that we've been really advising clients on. The idea for us is to make sure the project doesn't turn into chaos. We all had this vision of like these raids and people running all over the place. You know, they, ICE or Homeland Security cannot come onto private property without you authorizing it. So, post more signs where the job site starts. Find an area perhaps where they can stage if they're gonna stage there. There's several types of warrants. So what's been reported is they have an administrative warrant that doesn't authorize them to go to private property. Now, it's not to be uncooperative to say that, but as a contractor, you have a responsibility for the safety of anyone that comes on that job site.
Correct.
So the concern I've always had is if you don't, and you may not as the contractor, it's not really your property necessarily, right? So you have to make sure that you follow the proper steps in case, God forbid, something happens when they come on the job site, so that you're not in a position where there's unauthorized access or problematic access when they're there. So we talk a lot about how to control that if and when it happens. But what I've seen the most is low labor force because people are just not going to work.
Right.
And so certain ways to deal with that on projects, I think, and it's not just for this issue, I think in any issue, contractors need to very carefully track the man hours or labor hours on a job.
Right.
If a particular trade is expected to have 30 head count that day and all of a sudden they're at 10 to 15,
Right.
the technology now exists to know that in real time, right? Daily logs, wearables, all these things exist. And I think the implementation of that tech will help with this problem of labor shortage, because it's sold to me, that's what it comes down to. And identifying the trade contractor who's having a labor problem before that labor problem becomes the project's problem.
No, you're exactly right. So it's all about getting contractors in a mindset that they're going to prepare for every situation that could possibly happen on their jobs. Now, one thing we didn't talk about at the beginning of the year was tariffs, and now we're talking about tariffs. So what impact did it see?
It's interesting. After COVID, material price escalation was all the rage, right? And in fact, going into COVID, document crunch was just getting up and running, and I remember adding COVID specific and these types of issues into the platform. Then it seemed like it wasn't that material prices weren't going up anymore, but the industry seemed to have figured out how to deal with it, right? We were drafting escalation provisions. The trades were learning how to track so that when you sent the claim up to the owner where ultimately that risk should lie, it made sense. Like I felt like it was smoothed out. And then all of a sudden we have these tariffs that are very hard to predict. I think for like aluminum, steel, and lumber are the three materials I've seen and I've read have been the most impacted, and you're seeing double-digit price increases. How do you manage that? Well, I'll tell you what you definitely don't want to do as a contractor is commit a price to the owner and then delay signing up your trades.
Correct.
That's where I've seen the general contractors really have a problem, because in their contracts with the owner, they have relief for escalation, but it can't be their fault.
Right.
So if you don't sign up certain trades for even 60 or 90 days later, well, whose fault is that, right? But the real problem is at the trade contractor level, they're committing to a price on day one, and they may not be procuring those materials in a normal circumstance until much later in time. So I think you want to make sure that you're doing what you can to lock in the prices, but more than that, to the extent you can actually procure the materials immediately, you're better off doing that and storing them, because a trade contractor may be set with their price, but that doesn't mean they're going to be able to honor it, right? So the concern I've been having is, you procure your lumber by a flat fee subcontract agreement, but it's not going to be bought for 6 months later. What happens if the price continues to go up and the trade can't perform?
Right.
So tell me about one tip you might have for a general contractor and one tip you might have for a trade contractor. What should they be looking at as far as contracts, that kind of stuff?
Well, it's, with respect to tariff, let's deal with them both together. So you're going to talk about, you've got price pressure, right? And you've got shortages and delays. So you want to make sure that with respect to labor shortages and price escalation, that the risk gets passed on to the appropriate party. I would argue that's the owner, right? The owner, we're all going to agree that's the owner. So on the general contractor side, we spend a ton of time on a project negotiation, carefully dividing up who's responsible for price increases, who's responsible for the delays associated with all these different events, and who's going to bear that cost. And as a contractor, we take on some of that. Typically between 5 to 10% of a price escalation is usually where I see that shake out to the GC is going to cover that. But anything beyond that, the owner should cover it, whether it's a tariff or just general price increases that are beyond that approach. And we very carefully designate all that out. The subcontract agreements typically don't grant the subcontractor relief for those things. Now, I've seen some trades be able to negotiate that, but for the most part, the general contractors say, no, we need to have, you're the best position to control the price and to mitigate the risk. You have to own that.
Right.
And the way the market is, trade contractors typically have a hard time negotiating terms that are much different than this in the standard agreement. But the one tip is most subcontract agreements flow down the prime contract into their subcontract agreement. So if it's something that the general contractor has entitlement to, the trade contractors may as well through the flow down. But the one thing I've seen, and I work with amazing contractors, so maybe it's just because I've got great clients. Sure. Very rarely will a general contractor pull the subcontract out of the drawer and say, no, you're not getting this. The attitude typically is, if I'm entitled to it, I will push for you to get it from the owner, but of course that's to come from the owner. So I always tell the trades that are on the jobs that I'm working on, even if you're not entitled to it, track it and ask for it.
Right.
Because what you don't want to do is wait till the end of the job, oh wow, we have this huge busting cost, and then go to the general contractor and say, I need help.
Right.
Because the general contractor likely has waived the ability to ask at that point. The trade contractor likely didn't track it the right way. And then getting it at that point is much harder.
Right.
So I think,
that's a good tip.
yeah, I think and I think and again, I guess I will pitch Document Crunch a bit. Years ago, when I first started speaking, it was to Electrical Contractors Association. Josh and I were on stage. There was 50 or 60 electricians there, and they said, a lot of questions about, we want to see the prime contract. How do we get the prime contract? The GCs never want to give us the prime contract. And we said, it's critical that you get it. You're incorporating it, and you need to have a tool to digest it, right? It's one thing to say, let me see it, but if you don't have a tool or the knowledge base to review it and know what the entitlements are, it's worthless. Yep. So one of the things that I think has been really powerful with Document Crunch is, it's now very easy for general contractors to share a crunched prime contract with their trades, because I think the GCs want the trades to know what needs to be provided if you're experiencing tariffs or escalation or material shortages, so you could support your general contractor partner in getting it from the owner.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Adam, thanks so much for being here today, and thanks for being, so steadfast champion for our industry and creating a platform, a technology platform that's going to make things easier. Like, that's one of the things that, we're really invested in, making sure with our skilled labor, the shortage that we have, technology is going to play a big part in the future. And you as an attorney, with all of your advice and being able to upload that advice into a system that our contractors can benefit from is amazing.
Yeah, listen, thanks for having us. ABC's been a great supporter. I appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you guys for joining us on Blueprints and Banter, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.